The Moro and the Granolah arcs of the Dragon Ball Super manga have been met with mixed reactions across the board, to say the least. But this is not the reason they're unlikely to be animated. In fact, the reason they're unlikely to get an anime adaptation has actually been in front of us for a very long time. Regardless of the fact that people consider Toei Animation a money-hungry company that don't care about quality nor consistency so long as it prints them money, Toei do seem to have an agenda when it comes to Dragon Ball's money printing. Considering they don't take every opportunity to push Dragon Ball down everyone's throats, really suggests they're quite selective about what they shove down Dragon Ball fans' throats. Dragon Ball Super Superhero was the last bit of animated Dragon Ball that we received, and that was in 2022. And before that was the Broly movie that was released in 2018 or 2019, depending on where you live. Prior to that, it was the final episode of Dragon Ball Super, episode 131, that aired in March 2018, or if you waited for the dub, that episode aired in October 2019. It's important to point this out because Toei really don't mind making us wait for more Dragon Ball content. After all, Dragon Ball Super's anime ended 5 years ago. Yes, that's a real number, I'm sorry, but it is true. You might be wondering why they aren't making more Dragon Ball content right now whilst we have this drought of Dragon Ball. Other than Heroes, but who among us really counts Heroes at this point? Well, of course, there is a rumour of a web series being in development with substantial claims from respected members of the community to back its existence up. But sadly, that's all the proof of its existence that we have. And for so many of us, that rumour isn't going to be enough, considering we've been waiting 5 years for the television series to come back. But the thing is that Dragon Ball Super's manga did continue post-Tournament of Power, and so logically, there's content to be translated into an anime, right? Well, the truth is that Dragon Ball Super's anime was never truly adapting the manga to begin with. For those of you that kept up with the production of Super during its run, it was fairly common knowledge that Toriyama himself was providing bullet points for the arcs that were taking place, but he provided bullet points to Toyotaro and Toei separately. These were, to our knowledge, the same bullet points provided to both parties. I had to make sure I didn't knock my coffee then. This is mostly due to the fact that Dragon Ball itself isn't owned by Toei. Only the Dragon Ball animation is owned by Toei. And this is what led to us getting Dragon Ball GT back in the 90s, without a manga to adapt it from. Shueisha still owned the rights to Dragon Ball's manga, which is why the Super manga and the Super anime ran side by side, although overtaking each other at various stages, and why Toei didn't need to wait for the manga to be finished before they could start animating more content. Toei have always been scared of creating more Dragon Ball content without Toriyama's input. To be fair, this isn't because of GT, this started with GT, even requesting his input at the beginning for character designs and brief locations. But once his initial assistance ran out of longevity, because of course you can't get much out of a few characters and a few backgrounds, the show became a scramble to get it to a situation that was more like Z in terms of action. However, by that stage, the damage was done and GT was cancelled, and Dragon Ball basically went into a coma for the next 15 years. Now it's important to note that Toriyama has been writing these last few movie scripts for Toei. So it appears that Toei still requests these scripts from Toriyama and seem to do what they can to ignore Toyotaro. Perhaps the trust for Toyotaro just isn't there yet, who knows. But the differences between the Super manga and the Super anime are noticeable to anybody. And visibly, Toyotaro has on occasion, from the information we have, seen the anime, liked something that they've done, and implemented it into his manga, despite it not being in the bullet points provided by Akira Toriyama. During the Zamasu arc, as far as we know, Vegito wasn't actually a part of Toriyama's bullet points, yet Vegito made it into both the anime and the manga version of that arc. However, Toei don't appear to be quite so reciprocating with Toyotaro's work. Early on in the Universe 6 vs the Universe 7 tournament, the manga was still ahead of the anime. And although this design was already produced, approved by Toriyama, etc., Toei chose to go in their own direction with the arena designs for the Universe 6 vs Universe 7 tournament. Which is absolutely bizarre because Toyotaro's looked a lot better than Toei's did. Outside of his Tournament of Power character designs, of whom they're basically forced to use due to Toyotaro working with Toriyama to help design all of the Gods of Destruction, Angels, Kais, and some of the competitors in the tournament itself, Toei don't seem to like borrowing from the manga in any case. Even the video games don't tend to like using things introduced in the manga and would rather stick to events purely from the anime. Hence why Dokkan, Legends, and even Xenoverse 2 haven't had Moro or Granolah events. The next thing to consider is that Toriyama approves everything that Toyotaro submits for print, offering the occasional art correction and or story correction. So if Toei cared that much about having Toriyama's input, do these arcs not suffice considering that they had his involvement prior to publishing? You would think that Toei may consider that. Yet, since Super ended in 2018, Toriyama was tasked with writing the script for Broly, which supposedly started in development prior to Super's end, with the Moro arc having barely got off its feet by September 2019. At this point, it's reasonable to believe that because Moro's arc wasn't finished, Toei didn't want to touch it. But fast forward to 2023, that's now, Superhero released last year, with the scripting for Superhero allegedly beginning back in 2017, with the final draft apparently being produced around 2019 or 2020. COVID times. Bearing in mind the timings of all of these things, it seems unlikely that they were waiting for Toyotaro and rather have decided to just head in their own direction. This has been forcing Toyotaro to blast through certain things in his own continuity, such as virtually skipping the Broly movie with all but one quick panel. At this stage, it just feels more like Toyotaro is accommodating to fit Toei's input in, but not the other way around. The scripting having been completed before Ultra Ego was in the manga seems like a reasonable excuse to not feature Ultra Ego in Superhero. However, it seems almost intentional to ignore Toyotaro's manga at this stage, to not even host a line of dialogue referencing such a potentially important form for Vegeta. Considering Toriyama has approved all of these things, you would consider the fact that it would have ended up in the movie, at least in a form of dialogue. So now in 2023, we have a Dragon Ball anime shortage, with no official news from Toei to confirm upcoming projects, a supposed web anime that doesn't have anything to do with Dragon Ball Super's moniker, apparently, and nothing to confirm for Dragon Ball Super Series 2. The logistics of Toei now going back to animate 2 arcs that take place before their most recent movie seems a little hard to accept. Unless the plan is to do a Broly and Superhero retelling within their own series when it returns, it seems as though they've moved past this portion of the story. And considering the previous movie retellings were met with such disdain, it seems pretty unlikely they'll do that again. It certainly seems like they'll just head forward past the end of Z now, and head in a direction of their own once more, just like they did with GT. Maybe even do a GT reboot. I did actually do a video on that if you'd like to check it out after this video, but of course it's up to you. So currently, it really does seem as though the actual chances of getting Moro and Granolah animated are far from the plan for Toei. The only thing I can see happening is, should Toriyama complain that he's getting confused with giving bullet points for 2 different continuities that he's providing for both Toei and Shueisha, that Toei will implement them as movies or OVAs to try and aid Toriyama. But for now, all signs are pointing to Moro and Granolah as being manga only, and staying as manga only. For people that didn't like the Moro Granolah arcs, this is probably coming as good news. But for those who did enjoy the arcs, are you happy about this? Let me know in the comment section down below. And remember, if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving it a thumbs up and maybe even consider subscribing, as it really helps the channel out. But until we meet again, bye! After all, Dragon Ball Super's anime ended 5 years ago. Yes, 5 years ago. You can't even see my hand. After all, Dragon Ball Super's anime ended 5 years ago. I didn't trust myself that I could see my hand. It's yellow.